Czechoslovakia was a union established between the Czech and Slovak people in the Treaty of Versailles. The union was meant to be a stronghold of democracy after the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And judging from the economic prosperity of the Czech Republic today, the union had a bright future ahead of it. Well, I should say it would have, because its future began with the Second World War. The Czechoslovak army was much bigger and more well-equipped than what you might think. They had fairly modern equipment and 35 divisions ready to be mobilized. The Czech strategy was focused on the defense, since they were surrounded by bigger powers, after the Nazi Party had assumed total power in the German Reich after the Reichstag fire decree. By 1938, the only power in Germany that could realistically oppose them was the German army itself. The German army officer corps was made up of aristocrats of conservative ideology. The aristocrats weren't fond of the basically Austrian peasant who had only achieved the measly rank of colonel, being their Führer, so there were major plots to overthrow him. One of those plots is the Oster conspiracy, named after Major General Hans Oster, who was its leader. The conspiracy was supported by many high-ranking German officials, including the former Chief of Staff von Beck and the current Chief of Staff Franz Hauder, who immediately after assuming his position started making connections with the conspirators. And they would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for those pesky British politicians. The main strategic reasons for overthrowing the Nazi Party was that Hitler was ready to declare war on France and Britain for the Sudetenland, despite his generals telling him that the German army was nowhere ready to defeat Czechoslovakia while at war with Britain and France. The main reason why the German generals couldn't overthrow the government was the British policy of appeasement, headed by Neville Chamberlain. I think he gets too much of a bad rap for what he did. It's important to note that at the time, Britain was rapidly rearming, and he needed time to get the British and French army on par with Germany. And he thought that by playing the complex political game, he could corner Germany in a position where they couldn't win, so they wouldn't start a war, and the conflict would be resolved peacefully in his favor. Well, we know that all failed dramatically, and maybe his biggest mistake is not coordinating with the German aristocratic generals and organizing the Munich Agreement instead, which basically removed all justification for the coup against the Hitlerist government to start, since Hitler had managed to single-handedly annex the Sudetenland without even fighting a single Czech soldier. But if Britain had landed support to the monarchists in Germany, even though Neville Chamberlain would have probably not liked the re-establishment of the Kaiser Reich, the German Nationalist Party would have certainly seen its last days then and there. With the Munich Agreement, the Czechs decided that fighting wasn't worth it, since fighting a war against Germany alone would spell disaster, which led to the annexation of the Sudetenland by Germany and the later partitioning of Czechoslovakia by Germany, Hungary, Poland, and technically Slovakia, which rebelled under a fascist regime. But what if that never happened? What if the Munich Agreement wasn't signed? In our timeline, only a few minutes before the Munich Agreement was announced, there was an armed squad ready to storm the Reichstag. But in this timeline, they're not just ready, they're at the gates of the Reichstag and are pointing weapons at the high-ranking Nazi party members. The party members would be arrested, but seeing we all know what those people were capable of, I don't think anybody would have sympathy for the mock trials, lack of quote-unquote justice towards them. As far as consequences, is that the French quickly occupied the Saarland again. The French and British were not willing to invest resources to make Germany, for example, release Austria or follow the Versailles Treaty, so Germany stays mostly the same. As far as who would lead the new German government, there probably would be a military junta for about a year. Then Wilhelm II or III would become Kaiser of the reborn German Empire. And speaking of German monarchs, Hungary is isolated in this timeline, and I think Germany would take the opportunity to pressure them into electing as king Wilhelm III if Wilhelm II has assumed command of Germany itself. Let's say it happens, just for the sake of this video. The new situation in Europe would be very interesting, with Germany sort of at the backseat for the moment. Poland had claims on a Czechoslovak city named Teschen, which is a big reason why the two countries didn't pursue stronger alliance in the World War II period. In this timeline, Czechoslovakia would willingly cede the city to Poland, and in return, the two countries would become allies. There is an alternate timeline in which Czechoslovakia doesn't give Teschen to Poland, and the map somehow ends up looking like this. So if you want to see how that happens, go check that video out. Czechoslovakia benefited from the alliance because if Germany tried to violate its sovereignty again, they would have Poland on their side, and Poland wanted to establish an alliance between seas, also known as the intermarium, and Czechoslovakia was a step in that direction. The intermarium would only grow throughout the years, Around 1939, Romania and Finland would join. Finland would greatly benefit from this alliance, since now Finland would receive economic and military aid from both the intermarium and Scandinavian countries, and they would have even greater success in the Winter War. The reason for all of these countries joining the intermarium alliance is because most of them were a threat from Soviet imperialism, and they wanted to form a strong united power bloc that could oppose communism in Europe. The Baltics would actually refrain from joining, not because they didn't want to be part of the alliance, but because they feared that if they joined the alliance and broke neutrality, the Soviets would have an excuse to quickly invade them. Bulgaria and Yugoslavia would also be sympathetic to the intermarium alliance, but they would not join officially because, unlike their monarchist government, the population was very pro-Russian and by extension of that, pro-Soviet. By 1940, or maybe 1941 at the latest, the Soviets would have bettered their military situation and would have decided to attack the Baltic countries. They would probably start with Estonia and Latvia, but surprisingly for them, the two countries would be accepted into the intermarium alliance, and an offensive from all of the allied countries would be launched. The Soviets wouldn't really expect that, because they would think that every country would largely look after themselves and only intervene if some of their neighbors were attacked. The intermarium wouldn't really push that fiercely into the Soviet Union, since unlike the Germans, they weren't there to acquire land, but to defend themselves. They would probably try to push to cities like Minsk and Kiev, who had a largeable minorities, and a Ukrainian population who wanted a sovereign state, which would be in the interest of Poland. I think the line would solidify around the Dnieper River in modern-day Ukraine and Russia. But seeing as the intermarium is distracted, Germany, who would have greatly increased their military capacity, now bolstering a competent air force and large panzer divisions, would try to attack Czechoslovakia and Poland to seize what they saw as theirs in Danzig and the Sudetenland. This would be disastrous for them. Even if the German military was much better than what it was in 1938, Germany would once again be surrounded. Germany, by attacking Czechoslovakia and Poland, they would not only go to war with all of the intermarium, but France and Britain too. Germany wouldn't actually expect that, because they thought, since Czechoslovakia and Poland have made their own alliance, Britain and France would stay out of the conflict, but they were wrong. Seeing the opportunity to impose restrictions on Germany once again, Britain and France would take it, and they have already rearmed, so the conflict would go in their favor. Germany would still manage to push to the gates of Prague and retake Danzig, but they would have to move a large amount of forces to the Western Front and soon to the Alps, because the Italians, seeing how the winds are turning in the Western powers' favor, would join the Allies against Germany. They would want to expand their influence in Austria and probably Hungary, which, if you remember, is de facto under German control because its king is Wilhelm II. Italy would not have great success pushing through the German Alps, but a naval invasion from the UK would crumble the German defense, and the country would capitulate without a single Allied soldier in Berlin. Germany would not be split up into countries like in our timeline. Instead, Austria will be liberated under Italian influence, Hungary would become a democratic republic, Silesia would be released, and parts of Eastern Germany would go to Poland. I think that's where we're gonna leave off this video. If you're interested in what happens in the Soviet intermarium war, tell me in the comments and I'm gonna make a part 2. If you wanna check out the video on which Czechoslovakia and Poland don't become allies, click here. And if you're interested in another alternative history, click here.